Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Noblesse Awakening, a great OVA. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, to give you a little background of my experience with Noblesse, much like Tower of God, this is a manhwa I have read. Granted, it's been years. It's actually been even longer since I read Tower of God, because I mentioned it during my review. I had at one point restarted Tower of God and started. So I have not reread Noblesse in years, so I do know at the time of me recording this, I do know that the manhwa is finished. I just recently discovered it. I didn't know it had finished. Regardless, I think it finished like last year, I think I was looking at. But regardless, so other background information that's interesting too is I started the anime, but I only got like, 4 or 5 minutes in because I had to stop because I saw M21 in a suit and it's like, new security guard. I was like, wait. Considering the opening and everything, I was kind of confused because I was like, wait, isn't this a later arc? And it is, because it's arc 2. The anime starts with the second arc. I knew there was an OVA, but I didn't know like I needed to watch the OVA because it's technically the first volume, just of first season, but just very condensed. I didn't realize that because technically the anime, I mean, to be fair, the anime and the OVA were done years apart. This OVA came out 2016. That came out the anime came out last year. I'm kind of going, it's just interesting. I just immediately had to go, what? So I looked into it, found out about the OVA. So, regardless of all that, like I said, give you a little background with my experience with the series. Once again, it's been a couple, many years. Like I said, even longer than Tower of God since I last read this. But actually seeing animated everything is actually kind of wild. I know that there were some changes. Some of them I don't, like I said, it's been years, so I don't remember what some of those changes are. But other stuff is a little obvious. You can definitely tell where they are like condensing a lot from my perspective, especially because the opening to the series manhwa wise, if you've never read it, is super not super long, but it's slower. It's a very slow opening for this, because like actually all this stuff that's nearing the end of this is like the most action-packed aspects of the first season, because like there's not like a lot of action in the first season. It takes a while before you even get to those parts, because it's very slow at the beginning. It's just like Rai being at the school and everything. If I remember correctly, his interactions with Frankenstein the first time they meet up, that was a little bit more extended, if I remember correctly, because I feel like that might be something they did change, like the whole Rai just showing, like maybe that happened in the manhwa too, like him showing up at the school, changing his clothes just to blend in, because he went there because he could sense Frankenstein. But later on, there's that whole bit where like Rai's like, oh, I've experienced death, and Frankenstein's like, what? And he's like, yeah, it was this game. And he's like, oh, it was a video game. I understand, master. Like little bits like that got cut out, because if I remember, there was like a whole back and forth when they first met, where like Rai was like, why weren't you there when I awakened Frankenstein? He's like, please forgive me, master. It's kind of a little bit of a slapstick comedy bit. Not necessarily a slapstick comedy, but it's like they play it up a little bit more. Their first interaction was a lot more dramatic in this, which it had that element in the manhwa, but I think it was a little more like back and forth, like, you know, in that kind of comedy duo bit. Rai plays the straight man, he always does. But I just thought it's just once again, it's just like the Tower God thing, where it's like, right, it's like this is a series I read, and like now I'm able to put voices and just see the characters in full-blown animated motion. I definitely feel like they were able to dump a lot of money. I mean, you know, I'm not the most well-versed in production and stuff like that, but especially with the action sequences later on, because this is an OVA, typically I think OVAs end up being like even higher quality than most animes, just because it's a one-off. They're usually shorter things, so they can dump more money into it. So like action sequences seem like extra crisp when it came to the animation. You know, once again, I'm not some snob for that type of stuff anyway, but I feel like I noticed, I'm like, oh, look like you threw a lot of money into this, because it was a one-off. Like, once again, this came out like 3 to 4 years before the anime did. So with the actual full-blown like season, the actual anime series, but because they also like Rai's interaction with the kids, you know, Shinwu, Ikana, and Yuna, it's a lot more condensed too. Like they go into it a little bit about like their bonding of it. Dude, the moment I was like, they're at the cafeteria, I was like, is it the ramen? It's the freaking ramen. I love it. Because that's more of a bit. Maybe that's something that'll get covered more in the anime series, but I do know like I even love him being like, you think you can fool me? You think you're going to get me that easy? You think you're going to poison me? And he ends up, I don't think they really showcase it, but I know like that's like Rai's weakness. He loves ramen. He's like Naruto level obsessed with like ramen. So I thought that was pretty dope. But like his time with the kids is a lot more condensed. His time at school, like I said, because once again, you can understand why they condensed a lot of it because, like I said, the beginning of this manhwa is slow. Like I said, they play it up a little bit more jokey in the beginning before you really start kicking to the more serious tone. The M21 and M24 stuff, which I blanked on a lot of people's names. The only names I remembered going into this was Rai and Frankenstein, which I was like, did they drop his name that early on? I was like, I didn't remember maybe it did. I mean, his circumstances come up when they come up in the manhwa, like when he fights Marie, like, but I didn't remember his, I don't know, for whatever reason, I feel like his name comes up much later, the whole being Frankenstein thing, but maybe that's just me being stupid and not remembering. But your boy Shinwoo being, the chivalrous badass, like amongst the human characters, he's like the best. It's actually interesting too because I think they are the only 3 humans you get to spend any time with over the course. From what I remember of this series, they're the only humans Rai really interacts with it. You know, he actually kind of gets very attached to them because they skip over it, but like it's like, oh, Rai, where do you live? And he pulls out a card and it's like, oh, they're like, is that the director? And they flip it over and he's like, I'm lost, like this is my home. They skip it in this, but if I remember, they go back to Frankenstein's place, which is basically Rai's place, and like shenanigans ensue. Like they have a whole, like they completely cut that out. But like I said, like the beginning of the series plays up more like a comedy in certain regards. But like I said, going back to the M21 and M24 stuff, I think that because I think you do dive into their past a little bit more. I didn't remember their reasoning for trying to find the coffin. I remember they were trying to get away from was that the same in the manhwa? The whole trying to get away from the organization thing? I remember them being failed experiments and everything. Because part of me is wondering, like, M21, we got a glimpse at what he could do, but I'm like, to be fair, you got a glimpse of what everyone can do. But I'm like, what I'm thinking of what he can do, I'm like, oh, that's like a much later thing, like when you really dive into what his circumstances really are, like what he really is experimental-wise, because like all you saw is like his claws growing. You don't get to see fully what he is, and so that doesn't get covered until maybe the next arc. I think is when that really pops up. But I didn't remember, like, I feel like I vaguely remember the whole, like, the other experiments being killed by Jake. I definitely remember Jake. I kind of remember Marie, but it's just been so long. But obviously them not being the bad guys necessarily, like, yeah, they're not like 100% good guys, but they're not like the mass murderers like Jake and Marie were, like that whole hospital ordeal and everything. But going back to it, like I was saying, like your boy Shinwoo being like obviously getting like the hate from, first and foremost, getting the hate from all the girls the moment it's like Rice going to be sitting right beside him. And then like even him getting like kind of upset because Yuna's paying attention to Rai too. But when it's all said and done, him like not only taking on that guy that got turned by M24, but also him going toe to toe with Jake, and I'm like, every time he got up, he hit him with the chairman. That's my boy Shinwoo. Because if I remember correctly too, once again, maybe this will be something that gets covered in the anime, I do believe those circumstances actually have made him stronger. He might not remember it, if I remember correctly, but I know like this situation fighting against supernatural stuff like Jake and that vampire ended up making him physically stronger. He might not remember the circumstances of it, but I want to say it's M21 who takes notice of it later on, like, whoa, he's like even stronger than he was before. I do feel like the interactions between the kids and M21 and M24 was a little bit more than what it is. I mean, a lot of stuff was a little bit more. I was also kind of taken back because I was like, was the manhwa this bloody? I mean, you're dealing with at least one vampire, but there's other vampires as well. So of course things are going to get bloody. But and Rai's whole power circulates around blood. But I'm like, I still didn't remember it being as brutal as it was. But I'm like, once again, I might be misremembering, but because especially when Jake tore that vampire dude, just ripped his head off, I was like, Jesus. There was definitely more with the M24 thing, I believe, where it's like, I think you flash back a little bit more between him and M21 as friends. I think some of the stuff about him and watching his colleagues die, I think that was in the manhwa because that is his main motivation of why he helped Shinwoo, because it's right, you're willing to help protect your friends. It's not like him and M21 care about Jake or Marie anyway. It's no, we're just playing the long game so we could get the power from that coffin, kill you guys, and bounce. Because, it's they hate their guts because, especially Jake, because he killed all our friends because they were failed experiments. So, ultimately, once again, just the small things of them revealing who they really are, what they're capable of, Marie versus Frankenstein. It's just dude, he's getting it's just I legitimately got super hyped the moment Frankenstein starts, even just before Rai lets him off the leash, it's he immediately is just kind of because I think that line of his, I don't like your tone, I could have sworn, and I could be, super remembering this wrong, I thought he was that's why I don't like women like you, or something like that. It was, something, I think that, he didn't say tone, I think in the manhwa it was, he doesn't like women like Marie, or something like that. I think that's what once again, I could be misremembering, but, I just thought that was great. And especially just kind of oh, you underestimate. It's oh, you don't know who you're messing with. This is my boy Frankenstein. You have no idea. And then when Rai lets him off the leash, once again, it's just he's oh, you, just like I thought, you were what I started. And it's what does that even mean? And, obviously very true to his name. Obviously, I think the anime will go more into Frankenstein's, obviously backstory as we progress, in the season of the actual the anime series itself. But it's kind of doesn't matter, you're about to disappear now. Once again, I just didn't remember it being as bloody as that. But obviously, the super hype moment is when the guy's oh, you won't, Jake's oh, you won't even look me in the eye. And then Rai tells him to kneel. And that line of, now your eyes are where we're supposed to meet, or something like that, because you're supposed to be down. I'm not going to look up to you. I'm looking where my eyes are meant to be, where you're supposed to be looked down, looking up towards me. That's your. I'm being mouthy and wordy with it, but I'm that got me super hyped. I was hell yeah, because I'm it's so cool, how stupidly overpowered Rai is. To be fair, as the series progresses, they've, explained, the limitations of what he can do, that he's kind of on a clock to a certain extent. But it's just, that moment, and just, no matter how much time, Jake tried to get up, kneel. It's just, it reminds me of One Piece. It's been a while, but I believe it's called The Will of D. The whole, why Luffy's got the monkey D Luffy, go D Rogers. Anyone with that D has a special power in them. It's called I think it's called the Conqueror's Will, if I'm not mistaken. Because I know Luffy uses it, spoilers, for the first time on purpose during the time skip in the real Fishman Islands, where he basically makes half the enemies on the battlefield pass out just from his sheer will alone. It kind of reminds me of that, and just how effortlessly and badass Rai is, that he doesn't even need to try. It's just so oh, you're so screwed, Jake. It's you have no idea who you're up against, and obviously at the same time M21's realizing this guy, he's something special. It's really, wait, he's the Noblesse. He's the one we've been looking for this entire time. And just effortlessly, just swipe of his hand, slices off Jake's arm and slams it against the wall. And then using his blood, and it's your blood will be your sin will be punished with your own blood, and kills him like it's nothing. It's it's the most badass, no effort you've ever seen. I'm that's why I love Rai so much. He's so overpowered, especially at the beginning. But in that moment, it's so cool. And I think it's so interesting that they immediately end it there without giving you proper resolution. Because the anime picks up, like, everything's kind of settled. Like, we're already moving into the second arc. We don't get the, like, epilogue of the first arc. But if I remember correctly, because he made the kids go to sleep. If I remember correctly, it's either him or Frankenstein. It might be him. I think he wipes their memories out. That's why I was thinking, like, Shinwoo, like, his body remembers this experience, but he doesn't. I think all three of them had, because I don't remember, because I once again, I accidentally watched the first, at least a few minutes of the first episode. Shinwoo's arm is broken, obviously because Jake breaks it here, but I'm like, I'm trying to remember, I was like, did they remember the reasoning for that? Like I said, I'm fairly certain Rai wipes their memories, but I could be misremembering. And they're not even, and maybe this is something they'll cover too once we pick up with M21 in the anime, but like once again it's like, oh, he ain't in the suit yet. I love that, just being the signature of like, yeah, you're on Rai's team. Quite a few people, show up with some suits later, so I love it. I love that just being the signature, because it's like, right, everyone's got their jobs at the school and everything, but like I say, it's just so interesting, like all that you see, like it literally ending on Rai smiling, making like, oh, like here's my friends. Because there is a manhwa that covers Rai's past, and I know there's an arc later on. It's like maybe the third or fourth arc in I want to say it's the third season, maybe the fourth. It was on an island where you deal with a lot of like Rai's past, and like the leader, and this might be spoilers, I know like the leader who's running the place, she has mad beef with Rai. I think it has something to do with her dad, the reason why she hates Rai as much as she does. It's kind of a misunderstanding, if I remember correctly. Once again, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time, but we'll kind of cover all that when we get to the anime, because I think the anime is going to cover a lot of that. But it's just nice to see, like, it's so interesting that, like, that it's just kind of got this one-off. And I'm just surprised. I mean, I guess because it already got done, they decided, like, when it came to the actual anime series, like, well, let's not recover trail. Yes, this is a much more condensed version of it, but I guess because of, like, some of the slow pacing of, like, so I guess because it's like, right, it does a good enough job, like, it's just more character development. You miss, like I said, a lot of interactions between Rai and the kids, but a lot of the core story is still intact of what, like, the first season's about. Kind of introducing you to, like, right, this organization that was looking for the coffin that M21 and M24 belong to, and that Jake and Marie belong to. So this right here kind of ends up being the starting point that draws a lot of attention. Did this series always take place in Japan? Doesn't it take place in Korea? Well, because I know, like, based on, like, the little bit I saw of the first episode, it's like, oh, we're going to Japan. I'm like, but doesn't, because I know this is a Korean, it's a manhwa, so it's Korean, so I'm like, doesn't it take place in Korea? It doesn't, or does it take place in Japan? I thought it took place in Korea. It could be, maybe that's something maybe that's something they changed locations for the anime adaptation. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, it's not, like, a lot to talk about. I kind of spent so much time talking about other stuff, but it's nice kind of being in a mindset of this world again, just because it's been that long. Because anyone that's curious, I actually picked up Tower of God after I finished the anime, because anime covers, like, all of Season 1 of the manhwa, and I started with Season 2 again, and I'm actually further than I originally was years ago, so I plan to do the same thing, like when I actually finish the anime. Wherever it ends up, I'm going to pick the manhwa up there, and like I said, eventually finish it since the whole series is done. But yeah, I'm really excited to continue the anime after like the first few minutes I started. But I think it's so interesting. It's so weird because it is such a package deal, but it ends so abruptly. Like I said, you don't get no like resolution to everything. Like I guess by starting the anime, you kind of get those resolutions, but it's like it still would have been nice to kind of get like the aftermath of this. But I guess if you gave this aftermath, you would have had to set up like all the others. But even like not even let you get to like M21 joining with the Rai and everything. Like I said, maybe that gets filled in the anime. The series, but still, it's so weird, but it's still nice. But like I said, like if you want a little bit more character development, little moments between Rai, why he cares about the kids so much is because he spends a lot more time with them in the manhwa than his anime. They also cut they definitely cut around it. He doesn't really have many interactions with the kids. Like, he's just surrounding them and having fun around them. But he actually, they do a good job of also reflecting that in the anime. He doesn't talk at all. Like, so much of the beginning of this series, unless it's his interactions with Frankenstein, he doesn't talk. Like, I think it's like I think it's actually quite a while before you actually get your first, like, dialogue from Rai in the manhwa. Because he just doesn't talk that often. It's just like he just kind of sits back and kind of enjoys like the beauty of like human life, like how much has changed in the 828 years he's been asleep and everything. Once again, something like you're kind of like, oh, I think like if I remember correctly, like the context of all that doesn't come up until much later on. That's also another thing too. Like, wasn't Frankenstein looking for him? Wasn't that the whole reason why the coffin got pulled out of the water? I think Frankenstein hired those people to try and find Rai. Like I said, but that like whole like interaction between him and Frankenstein was like heavily reduced. Like I said, maybe I'm full of crap, but I feel like I remember that thing of like Frankenstein was looking for Rai. It just took him a long time. And then, like I said, I think like Rai kind of like berates him a little bit because it's like, oh, you weren't there when I woke up. And he's like, I'm so sorry, Master, please forgive me. Like I said, like some like comedy bits, but I don't know. But I mean, really, it's a nice little condensed jump into this world, and it just makes me that much more excited to watch the anime. I'm going to be releasing this all at once, all the reviews, so when you're listening to this, the rest of all of season 1 should be out whenever this is. Hopefully this is Sunday that this ends up going up if things go according to plan, but I will be like releasing all of the anime on all the reviews at once. So I'll probably just release the next one as like, I don't know if I'll just put like season 1 episode 1 or whether I'll just call it the series premiere, because it technically is a series premiere, because technically this is kind of a one-off in its own thing. But yeah, I'll link to it in the end card regardless of what I end up titling the first episode of season 1. But regardless, I'm very excited to continue watching more Noblesse. Obviously, I'm sure the anime will be condensed in its own regards, but obviously not as heavily condensed as this. So I'm very happy to kind of continue in the story and just kind of continue with more shenanigans between like Rai, the kids, and Frankenstein, and that whole bit, and just as the story develops more and more in other regards as well. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.